It was supposed to be a quiet morning, just like any other. But then, I saw the note. Gone to visit friends for the weekend, don't wait up. My heart sank as I held the piece of paper in my trembling hands. Sarah, my wife of 5 years, was gone. But something felt off. This wasn't like her. We always talked about our plans, even if we were just going to visit a friend. I glanced at the clock, 9:30 a.m. She'd left early this morning. That's when the unease settled in. Why hadn't she told me? I reached for my phone, almost instinctively, and pulled up the GPS tracker. My car. There it was, located just outside town. My mind raced as I realized Sarah had taken my car. Why? Was she really visiting friends, or was there something more? My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Something wasn't right. A knot twisted in my stomach as I made the decision to follow the signal. Maybe it was nothing, but something told me it wasn't. I grabbed my keys, heading for the door, the feeling of dread growing stronger with each step. As I left the house, I couldn't shake the thought that I was about to uncover something I wasn't ready for. I followed the GPS. It took me deeper into the woods, farther than I'd ever gone. The trees were dense, and the road narrowed with each turn. My thoughts raced. Where was she going? Why hadn't she told me? Every mile seemed to pull me further from the life I knew. The car's engine hummed steadily as I pushed the accelerator, the quiet around me amplified by the weight of the questions I had no answers to. The screen on my phone lit up again, showing me the location. It was just ahead, there on the side of the road, the outline of a cabin coming into view through the trees. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. The cabin was small, nestled in the shadows of the trees, isolated from the world around it. A sense of dread washed over me as I pulled up, the gravel crunching under the tires. This was where my wife had come, and this was where my life was about to change forever. The cabin stood in eerie silence. I hesitated at first, my hand hovering over the car door handle, but something inside me urged me to move. I had to know. Slowly, I stepped out of the car, the sound of my boots crunching against the gravel. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently in the wind, but the air felt thick, almost suffocating. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before walking towards the cabin. Each step felt heavier than the last. I wasn't just walking to a cabin, I was walking towards the truth. As I reached the front door, I paused. The handle was cold under my fingers as I twisted it. The door creaked open, and I was greeted by an overwhelming stillness, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. My heart raced, my senses heightened, and I stepped inside. I pushed the door open, the creaking sound echoing in the silence. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and musty air, with no sign of life. But then, I noticed it. A jacket thrown carelessly over the back of a chair, food wrappers scattered on the coffee table. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped further into the room. The unease intensified as I looked around, trying to make sense of it all. Why was Sarah here? Who else was here with her? The room was empty, but the signs of life, of someone who had been living here, were everywhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of discovering something far worse than I could have imagined. I turned a corner and froze. There, in the dim light of the bedroom, I saw them. Sarah, my wife, and another man lying on the bed. The world seemed to crash down around me as I stood there, unable to move. My breath caught in my throat. It was Josh, her childhood friend. I couldn't believe my eyes. My mind struggled to process what was happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was my life, my marriage, and it was falling apart in front of me. I backed away slowly, my heart breaking with each step. I needed to get out of there, but the damage was already done. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe. What had I just seen? My heart ached as the weight of the betrayal settled over me like a heavy blanket. Sarah, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was in bed with someone else. And not just anyone, Josh. her childhood friend. The one I trusted, the one I believed was harmless. But here they were, together, in a way that shattered everything I believed in. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. My breath came in shallow bursts, my hands trembling as I gripped the doorframe. How long had this been going on? Was this the truth I had been blind to all along? I had so many questions, but none of them seemed to matter. The damage was done. My wife had betrayed me with someone I had welcomed into my home, someone I had called a friend. The world seemed to spin as I backed away from the bedroom door. The anger, the sadness, the disbelief, they all collided inside me. I couldn't stay there. I had to leave. I turned quickly, heading back to the car, not sure what I was doing, but knowing I couldn't face them in that moment. As I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing with thoughts that made no sense. Everything felt out of place, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I drove aimlessly, the road stretching out before me like an endless path into the unknown. My mind couldn't focus, couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The image of Sarah and Josh together kept flashing before my eyes, over and over again, like a cruel loop I couldn't escape. I tried to push the thoughts aside, but the ache in my chest wouldn't go away. I didn't know what I was looking for, what I expected to find, but I couldn't stop myself from searching. The road ahead seemed endless, and so did my pain. I found myself turning off the main road, onto a dirt path that led through the trees. My hands clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white with tension. I needed to think, needed to clear my head. But the more I thought, the more the anger and confusion built up inside me. I could feel the rage rising, threatening to take control. How could she do this to me? How could he? The questions kept coming, each one more painful than the last. I pulled off the dirt road and stopped the car in a small clearing, the engine idling softly. I couldn't sit still anymore. I needed to get out, to do something. Anything. I slammed the car door shut and walked toward the edge of the clearing, the trees surrounding me like silent witnesses to my pain. I didn't know how long I had been standing there, staring into the woods, trying to make sense of everything. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Rage, betrayal, sadness, confusion. It felt like the world was closing in on me, pressing in from all sides. The forest around me was silent, save for the distant rustling of leaves. It should have been calming, but all it did was deepen the isolation I felt. I wanted to scream, to release the pain that was building inside me, but no sound came. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a world that no longer made sense. I thought about Sarah, about everything we had built together, the life we had shared, the love we had promised to each other. And now, it was all shattered. All of it was a lie. How long had she been seeing Josh? How long had I been living in the dark? I turned away from the trees, my feet heavy as I made my way back to the car. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be alone with my thoughts. But no matter where I went, the truth followed me. It was there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting to strike. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when I finally returned to the cabin, the air felt different. It wasn't the same place I had driven to earlier. The silence was suffocating now, and every step I took seemed to echo louder than before. I opened the door slowly, my hand shaking as I pushed it open. The cabin was still and empty, but it felt wrong. It was as though the walls themselves held the weight of the betrayal. The feeling of being watched lingered in the air. I took a step inside, the creaky floorboards beneath me adding to the eerie atmosphere. The kitchen was just as I left it, empty, still. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It didn't feel like the place I shared with Sarah. It felt like a lie. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps slow and deliberate, until I reached the bedroom. I stopped in the doorway, looking inside. It was as though the bed still held the imprint of Sarah and Josh, as though their presence lingered in the room. The betrayal was real. It was no longer just a question in my mind. It was fact. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. My life felt like it was unraveling at the seams, and I was powerless to stop it. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on me, and I could feel the anger rising once again. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the secrets, everything that had been kept from me. My trust had been shattered, and with it, everything I thought I knew about love. I paced the cabin, my mind spinning with thoughts of revenge, of confrontation. I thought about what I could say to Sarah, how I could make her understand the pain she had caused. But the truth was, I didn't even know if I wanted to face her. I didn't know if I could ever look her in the eyes again. I stopped near the window, staring out at the darkened forest. The night had fallen, and the trees seemed to close in around me, just as my emotions were closing in on my heart. This was it. This was the turning point in my life. I had to make a decision, whether to confront the truth or walk away from it all. I drove back to the cabin. The rage that had consumed me earlier had settled into something colder, something darker. I didn't know what I wanted anymore, answers, revenge, or just to forget. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah with him. Josh's face haunted me, a reminder of everything I had lost. I didn't want to face them, but I couldn't leave without doing something. The storm inside me was impossible to ignore. The more I thought, the clearer it became. I needed closure, not just for me, but for my shattered sense of self. I arrived back at the cabin, the old wood and the worn porch now symbols of betrayal. The car's engine hummed softly, but the silence of the night crept in. I knew that what I was about to do could change everything. My heart raced with anticipation, with fear, and with a resolve that made me want to turn away from the door. But I didn't. I couldn't. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. My fingers hovered over the handle, trembling slightly, but I gripped it and pulled. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with silence, the kind of silence that echoes in your bones. Every step I took seemed to amplify the weight of the moment. I walked through the living room, my footsteps muffled by the old wooden floors. The unease in my chest grew with each passing second. I couldn't stop myself from searching the rooms, each one empty and still. My heart beat louder with every corner I turned. The kitchen was just as I left it, but the mess on the table, the jacket on the chair made everything feel off-kilter. I couldn't understand it. I wanted to scream, to confront them both, but no words seemed to come. As I made my way to the bedroom door, I hesitated for a moment, my mind battling between confrontation and escape. But there was no going back now. I pushed the door open, the room still, as if waiting for me to enter. The bed was untouched, but it felt like everything had been disturbed. The bedroom door swung open, and there they were, Sarah and Josh, in a twisted version of what was supposed to be a life I had built. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes locked onto Sarah first, her face pale and stricken with guilt. Then my gaze shifted to Josh, who sat up abruptly, his face betraying no real surprise, just a kind of quiet resignation. The anger hit me first, sharp and jagged. My fists clenched, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. The words I needed to say, the things I wanted to throw at them, felt stuck in my throat. What could I say that would make any sense? My mind raced with 1,000 emotions, but none of them felt like they would change anything. Sarah looked up, her face crumpling as if she had been expecting this moment. I didn't know whether to scream or leave, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in that moment, caught between my heartbreak and the need to demand answers. "How long?" I whispered, my voice strained. The room was silent for what felt like an eternity. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat feeling like a blow. Sarah's eyes searched mine, filled with guilt and fear, but there was something else there, something I couldn't identify. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt empty. How could an apology fix this? How could it fix the damage that had already been done? Josh finally spoke up, his voice steady, though it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. "It was never supposed to happen like this," he said, his eyes meeting mine briefly before he lowered his gaze. But it didn't matter. His words didn't change anything. The truth was out, and nothing they could say would undo the betrayal. I felt the anger rising again, but I didn't want to let it take control. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked away, my mind buzzing with thoughts I couldn't make sense of. "I can't do this," I muttered as I left the room, the door slamming behind me. I could feel them both watching me, but I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out. The night air hit me hard as I stepped outside, the cool breeze barely easing the heat of the emotions raging inside me. I walked aimlessly, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on me. Everything felt so wrong, like I was stuck in a nightmare, and no matter what I did, I couldn't wake up. I passed through the trees, my feet moving on autopilot, but my mind was everywhere but present. I kept hearing Sarah's voice, her apology, Josh's words, but none of it made sense. They both had betrayed me, in their own way. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the trust that had been shattered. I stopped by the edge of the clearing, my eyes looking out at the dark woods. The stillness of the forest reflected the emptiness inside me. It felt like a void that nothing could fill. I knew I couldn't go back there, not yet. But I couldn't stay here either. The silence was deafening, and I needed to make a choice. What was I going to do now? The night was restless, and the silence only seemed to deepen the turmoil inside me. After leaving the cabin, I didn't know where I was heading, just that I couldn't stay in that place any longer. My mind kept circling back to Sarah and Josh. The betrayal wasn't just in what they had done. It was in the way they had lied to me, in the way I had trusted them both without question. My emotions were a mix of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming feeling of betrayal that didn't seem to ease. I had spent the night pacing, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't go back to the life I had before, pretending like nothing had changed. But what could I do now? Confront them again? Leave and start over? I couldn't bear the thought of staying in that town, knowing what I knew. I drove through empty streets, the headlights casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The city felt hollow, as if the buildings themselves had felt the weight of my heartbreak. I found myself parking at a small rundown bar on the edge of town. I didn't know why I was there, but the sound of music drifting from inside pulled me in. I needed something, anything, to distract me from the chaos in my mind. I walked into the bar, the faint smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hitting me immediately. The dim lights above flickered sporadically, adding to the sense of discomfort that settled over me. The noise of clinking glasses and murmurs of conversation filled the space, but it was all background noise to the storm inside me. I moved through the room, trying not to think about the past few days, about Sarah and Josh. I needed something to numb the pain, something to make the world feel a little less heavy. I sat at the bar, the bartender nodding as I ordered a drink. The cold glass felt like a lifeline, the alcohol burning my throat as it went down. For a moment, I let the numbness take over, not thinking about what had happened or what was coming next. I glanced around, but my eyes kept returning to the same empty place. I was alone in this crowd, a stranger to everyone around me, trapped in my own thoughts. The more I tried to drink away the pain, the more the guilt crept in. I should have left earlier, should have confronted Sarah instead of running. But I didn't, and now I was stuck here, drowning in my own confusion. The night stretched on, and my mind refused to quiet down. I couldn't just sit here forever. I had to do something, even if I didn't know what that something was. I had always been someone who believed in facing things head on, but now it felt like I was avoiding the inevitable. Every sip of my drink felt like a delay, a way to put off the confrontation that was waiting for me back at the cabin. I knew I couldn't run away from this. But I also knew that facing Sarah and Josh wouldn't make me feel better. It would just make everything real. My hands gripped the glass tightly, the coldness of the ice seeping into my skin, and for the first time that night, I decided to leave. I stood up, my legs unsteady from the alcohol, but I didn't care. I had to face them. No more running. As I left the bar, the cool night air hit my face, the crispness making my head clearer. I walked down the street with purpose, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet. I was ready now. Ready to find out how deep the betrayal went. Ready to confront the people who had shattered my trust. I arrived back at the cabin, the familiar sight of it now twisted by the weight of everything I had learned. The anger from earlier had turned into something else, an ache, a deep sorrow that I couldn't shake off. The cabin seemed smaller now, as if it were shrinking in response to my inner turmoil. The door was still ajar, as if waiting for me to walk back inside, to confront the truth once more. I stepped inside slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was silent, and for a moment it felt like everything had stopped. Sarah wasn't here. Neither was Josh. The place felt like a ghost town, and I wondered if it had always felt this empty, or if it was just me now. I moved through the house, taking in the quiet, the same stillness I had felt before. But this time, it was different. It was heavier, filled with the ghosts of conversations I had yet to have. I stopped in front of the bedroom door. I knew what was inside. I could feel it, the tension, the weight of everything that had happened here. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. I opened the bedroom door, my body tense, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The room was just as it had been before, the bed empty, the sheets slightly askew. But this time, I noticed the subtle signs, the small details that told a different story. A discarded pair of shoes by the door, a crumpled piece of paper on the floor. It was as if Sarah and Josh had been here just moments ago, but the room was eerily still now. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. I could feel the betrayal in the air, thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to confront them both right here, right now. But the silence was overwhelming. I stood there, paralyzed for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. What had brought us to this point? How had everything turned so wrong? And then I heard it, the sound of the front door opening, followed by the muffled voices of Sarah and Josh returning. They were back. And now, the confrontation would finally happen. The door opened with a soft creak, and there they were, Sarah and Josh, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. The air between us crackled with tension. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, and Josh's posture was stiff, as if bracing for impact. I could feel the anger rising in my chest again, but this time, it wasn't just anger, it was something deeper. Something that came from the raw, jagged pieces of my broken heart. I had spent days trying to make sense of this, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do, and now, it was all crashing down in front of me. Sarah stepped into the room, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words fell flat. I could tell she was trying to reach me, trying to explain herself. But I couldn't hear it. Not anymore. Not when everything we had was built on lies. I didn't know how to respond. The words that came to mind felt too weak, too broken. I had spent years trusting her, and now I was left with nothing but a hollow feeling. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "How could you?" I asked, the pain in my voice betraying me. There was a heavy pause before anyone spoke again. The silence between us felt suffocating, like we were all trapped in this moment that had no escape. Sarah's eyes met mine, but there was no apology deep enough to undo what had happened. Her gaze was full of regret, but I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust anything anymore. Josh finally broke the silence, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "It was a mistake," he said. But his words sounded rehearsed, empty. A mistake? I felt my fists clenching at my sides. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And that choice had shattered everything. My mind was racing. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to make it all stop. But instead I just stood there, numb. "A mistake?" I echoed, my voice strained. "You both knew what you were doing. It wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal." My eyes flickered from Sarah to Josh. "And now what? What do you want me to do with that?" Sarah opened her mouth to say something more, but the words caught in her throat. She took a step forward, hesitated, and then stopped. The space between us felt like an insurmountable chasm, one that had only grown wider with every passing moment. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. "It just happened." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the desperation in it. She was reaching for something, some explanation, some way to make it better, but it was too late. I had heard all the excuses already. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "You made a choice. You both did." I could feel the cold burn of betrayal gnawing at my insides. There was nothing she could say that would make this right. She looked at me with pleading eyes, but I couldn't look back. "Not now. Not after everything. You both have to leave," I said, the words cold and final. "I can't do this anymore." The look of shock on Sarah's face was enough to break me, but I held firm. I had to. I couldn't live in the lie anymore. I walked toward the door, my movements slow, deliberate. As I passed by them, I could feel their eyes on me, but I refused to acknowledge them. I didn't want to see their faces anymore. I didn't want to feel the weight of their guilt pressing down on me. The anger had drained out of me, leaving only emptiness in its wake. When I reached the door, I stopped for a moment, my hand resting on the handle. I could hear them behind me, the soft sounds of Sarah's sobs and Josh's attempts to speak, but I didn't turn around. I had said all I needed to say. There was nothing left for me here. "Goodbye," I said, my voice quiet but firm. And with that, I opened the door and walked out. The cold night air hit me again, but it was different this time. The numbness was starting to wear off, and I felt the weight of everything settling in. I didn't know what came next, but I knew that whatever it was, it had to be better than staying in this toxic lie. I walked into the night, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. The cool breeze cut through me, but it didn't numb the ache inside. I had left them behind, but the pain was still there, heavy in my chest. The further I walked, the more I realized that I wasn't just walking away from Sarah and Josh. I was walking away from a version of myself that no longer existed. The man who had trusted without question, who had loved unconditionally, was gone. I didn't know who I was anymore, but I knew I couldn't stay in this town. I couldn't stay where everything reminded me of what I had lost. The street stretched before me, empty and dark, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter. I couldn't stay. Not here, not with them. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in days, I felt like I was finally making my own choice. I didn't have the answers, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't go back. I walked the empty streets for hours, the night swallowing me whole. It wasn't just the pain that kept me moving, it was the need to escape. The familiar city felt alien now, like a place I no longer belonged. Each step took me farther from Sarah, from the life I thought I knew. The weight of everything settled on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had always been someone who faced things head on, but now I was running away from a reality I couldn't bear. The streets were quiet, too quiet, as if the world had paused, waiting for me to make a decision. I didn't have any answers, just an overwhelming need to keep going. The city stretched before me like an endless maze, and I had no idea where it would take me. But for the first time I didn't care. I had nothing left to lose. As I wandered, I found myself outside a small, dimly lit diner. The neon sign flickered, casting an amber glow on the pavement. I didn't know why I stopped, but something about the warmth of the diner's light pulled me in. I opened the door, the sound of a bell ringing above me. The inside was quiet, the faint hum of an old jukebox filling the silence. A waitress, probably in her 40s, greeted me with a tired smile. "What can I get ya?" she asked, her voice soft, unaffected by the world outside. I sat at the counter, ordering the first thing that came to mind. I wasn't hungry, but I needed something, anything, to distract me from the gnawing emptiness. The coffee came hot and strong, but it didn't taste like anything. Just like everything else, it was hollow. I stared into the cup, lost in my thoughts. The coffee did little to settle my mind. I needed something more than a warm drink to erase the memory of the betrayal. My mind kept going back to Sarah, to everything we had built, and now it was all in ruins. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? I wanted to scream, to shout at the world for what had happened, but the words never came. They just lingered in my throat, suffocating me. I wasn't sure how long I sat there staring into the mug, but eventually I stood up and paid. The weight of the day dragged at my shoulders, and as I stepped back outside, the cold air hit me like a slap to the face. It was a bitter reminder that I wasn't running from my problems. I was only delaying the inevitable. I kept walking, not sure where I was going. The night had grown colder, and the streets were quieter now. I thought about going back, confronting Sarah, demanding answers. But part of me knew it wouldn't matter. The betrayal had already happened, and nothing could change that. I found myself outside a park, the lights of the city flickering in the distance. I sat down on a bench, looking up at the sky. The stars seemed distant, almost mocking, as if they were watching me from far away. I wanted to scream, to let everything out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just sat there, staring at the sky, feeling small and insignificant. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know what I needed. I only knew that I couldn't keep running from the truth. I stood up from the bench and walked toward the exit of the park. The silence felt oppressive, but it was the kind of silence that spoke louder than any words. I was finally facing the reality of what had happened. I wasn't sure what came next, but I couldn't stay in this place anymore. The city had become a cage, one that I needed to escape. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in days, I felt a small glimmer of hope. The future was uncertain, and that scared me, but it also made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was unclear, but it was mine to walk now. I didn't have to look back. I could move forward, even if I didn't know where that would lead. The road stretched out before me, endless and dark. I walked without direction, knowing I couldn't go back to the life I had before. I didn't know where I was heading, but it didn't matter. The past few days had changed me. My heart was heavy, and yet there was a strange clarity now. I didn't have answers, but I had a sense of freedom. The city behind me had become a distant memory, and with each step, I was leaving the person I used to be. The past couldn't define me anymore. I could feel the weight of it lifting. The road ahead was uncertain, but that was all right. It had to be. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. The night was quiet, the world holding its breath as I moved forward, letting go of the shadows. I didn't stop walking until I reached the edge of town. Oh, the roads were less familiar now, the streets darker and quieter. I stopped for a moment, catching my breath. There was no particular reason for stopping, but it felt like a moment of reckoning. I could feel the weight of my decisions, the burden of leaving everything behind. But I didn't regret it. Not anymore. The life I had once known felt like a ghost now, fading away with every step I took. There was no going back, no way to undo what had been done. All I could do was keep moving. And I would. I had to. The future, whatever it held, was mine to define. The silence of the night was comforting in a way. As I walked further, I realized I hadn't felt this alive in years. The weight of the past had been suffocating, but now, in this quiet, there was room to breathe. I didn't need to know where I was going. I just needed to keep going. Every step was a small act of defiance against the life I had left behind. It wasn't just Sarah or Josh that I was walking away from. I was walking away from the version of myself that had accepted betrayal. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't defined by what had happened. I was defined by what I chose to do next. And I had chosen to move forward. I didn't know how long I walked, but eventually, I found myself standing by a small park. The sky had lightened slightly, the first signs of dawn breaking through the horizon. The air was crisp, and the stillness of the world felt different now. I had walked away from everything, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The uncertainty of the future seemed less daunting. It was just life, waiting to unfold, and I was ready for whatever came next. I sat on a bench, looking out at the park, watching the first rays of sunlight hit the grass. There was a calmness in the air, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. As the sun rose higher, I stood up from the bench, taking in the beauty of the new day. The world felt different, more open. I could feel the weight of the past lifting. Slowly, but surely. It wasn't that I had forgiven Sarah or Josh, or that everything was fine now. But I had taken control of my life again. I wasn't a victim to their actions. I was moving forward, taking steps into a future that was mine to create. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I had the strength to face it. The first real step toward healing had been taken, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I turned and walked away from the park, my path clear.